Let's start with a fresh scene and go into front view. And we're going to hit Shift A for our add menu, select image and reference image. Go to a place where you have a picture of a refrigerator. I'll link to the one I have in the description below. And move that up on the Z till it's kind of level there. And what we can also do is change our pivot point to 3D cursor so that when we scale this, it'll scale toward the cursor. See, it doesn't go toward the center there. Anyway, let's change the properties of that to always show in front and turn our opacity down to 0.2 or below. Shift A again will bring up our add menu. Let's add a cube. Unless you have a default scene where there's already a cube, then that's not a problem. We can move that up on the Z in edit mode by 1 meter. That way our origin point will be at the bottom, and that makes for easy scaling as well. We can paste the dimensions into this side panel here where it says dimensions. And of course, after we've changed the dimensions of something by scaling it this way, you'll see that the scale is not uniform all the way around. So what we can do is apply that scale. Now each one is a whole number. And let's scale down our reference image so that our height matches fairly closely. This doesn't have to be super exact. That looks pretty good. Now let's select our cube that's about to be our refrigerator and go into edit mode. Control R will bring up loop cut, and let's bring it to about the edge of our door where we think it'll be. They're usually pretty thick on a refrigerator because there's shelves in there and whatnot. And that's probably going to be a good distance for the seam where there's going to be kind of a squishy seal. So let's go into face selection mode, Alt click on one of the edges so you get the entire loop, delete faces, and let's fill in these loops. So Alt click will be the entire loop. F is fill. Now we have two rectangles in the same object. Let's select one piece of the door, hit Control L to select all connected, and hit P for separate, and we'll go with separate by selection. Now we have a door and a main part. Now this is going to be double doors, as you can see, and we're going to have a refrigerator on the bottom. So let's go into front view, tab into edit mode on the door portion. Control R will bring up our loop cut again, and we're going to do a horizontal cut. Bring it down to this seam and bevel that one time. And we're going to delete that face ring as well. And once again, fill in these loops, and that looks pretty good. Let's take this bottom portion and separate that as well. So now we have three basic objects that will make up the primary portions of our refrigerator. Let's select the doors at the top and go into front view again, tab into edit mode, and Control R will bring up our loop cut. And we'll bevel that as well. Not as much as that bottom seam was, and we will delete those faces and select one side of it, left or right, doesn't matter, and delete the entire thing. And we're going to fill in that edge loop of the remaining one. Now we can add our mirror modifier. We're going to hide it right away anyway, but I'm going to show you what it does. It just mirrors, so any changes we make on one side will affect the other as well. Let's hide it by hitting this monitor button. And now we need to subdivide this a little bit before we make our insets for our handles. So let's go into front view again. Most of this is being modeled from the front because that is the part you're going to see. So let's add a loop cut here, one in the middle, and then bevel that out. About there. It needs to encompass the handle, and it's going to give it some breathing space because we need control rings so that all this geometry that's about to be created in here won't spider all over the rest of the mesh. So put another one here. Actually, let's do two and delete this forward one. That's just so we have some even spacing. It doesn't really matter if you do 2 and delete 1 or just put 1 and slide it where you want it. Now we can select these two faces, go into front view once again, and inset a little bit. If we try and scale this on the Z, you'll notice it goes downward. That's because we're scaling toward the cursor, because that is the pivot point we selected. Let's go back to median point. Now if we scale on the Z, it'll come in nicely, just like that. And we can grab this back edge and move it, double tap G actually to edge slide. And that looks like a good space to cut out our handle. So let's select that leading edge and hit delete. And we're going to delete the edges. So now we have this gaping hole. At this point we can turn on our snapping and turn it to vertex snapping. And select this edge again and extrude it on the Y only, and then extrude it over on the X. And then we can fill in these sections with the F key. Now when we did that, that created some overlapping geometry that is not great, because it actually leaves some holes in our mesh. If we move things around, you see they're not all connected. So we can select all vertices, and the easy way to fix that is to hit your search, which is either F3 or space, and search for merge by distance. And anything within this distance to each other will merge together, or any vertices within that distance will merge together. Now we can go into edge selection mode, select this back edge and hit Control B for bevel, and move your scroll wheel to determine how many edges we are going to put in that. I think 3 segments is enough for this. Let's select the top and bottom back edges and go into front view again. Now we're going to bevel these to match our reference image. So Control B, and we want this to be an even number. So 4 is probably pretty good, and get kind of close to that curve. Now we've created some n-gons and some triangles, and if you know the basics of modeling, n-gons and triangles are not optimal. We're going to select this vertex and then this one and hit M and merge at last, and we're going to do the same thing up top. N-gons are a problem really in most cases. Triangles are not such a problem, especially since going into a game engine, everything gets converted to triangles anyway. I'm selecting these edges and hitting Control Delete or Control X to dissolve them rather than delete them. Now it's time to do the same thing on the freezer door at the bottom. We want to add a little bit of subdivision and then do our inset again, just like the top. Like with the dishwasher tutorial, should you not feel like following the whole tutorial, but would still like to download the finished asset and project file, it will be available in my store, and if you stick around to the end of this video, there will be a discount code for those files. This is just one method I'm putting out there for people to support the channel. If you really like the content that I'm putting out there and would like to see more, I'm trying to devote more time to creating tutorials, but that does take time away from other things. If nothing else, you can like this video, you can subscribe to the channel, and of course comments are always appreciated. Now that we've created our recess regions, we can create the kind of plastic rim and casing that goes in here before adding the handles. So an easy way to do that is to select all of the area inside of the recess. Once you've selected it, hit Shift D to duplicate it. So you can see there it is. If I hit escape, it goes right back where it started. Hit P to separate again and select that portion. Now what we're going to do next is add a modifier, and that modifier is going to be the solidify modifier. As you can see, what that does is it takes our kind of flat geometry and adds thickness to it. We want to bring that back in the opposite direction. 0.006 looks alright. What we're going to do now is do the same down here. Once you've separated the frame or recess plastic piece, I don't know what we're calling it right now, but this piece, select the one that was just created and select the one that already has that modifier on it. Hit Control L and copy modifiers. And you don't have to try and replicate the same parameters between the two then. Now it is time to create the handles. So if we go into edit mode like this, because the solidify modifier is not adding actual geometry or actual mesh data to the object, it's going to be difficult to select the pieces we want. So let's go back into object mode and bring that solidify up to the top of the modifier stack. Hit this arrow and hit apply, and do the same on the next one. Now when we go into edit mode, we have our real geometry. So an easier way to work on a piece like this, especially when we have this transparent reference image there, would be to go into local view or local mode, and that is the slash on the numpad. And we need to create a little more geometry in here in order to make a handle. And these handles have a flush side here, and then a piece that kind of comes here where you put your finger and curl it around and pull out the door. So let's create our geometry for that. First, let's add our cut here, and we're going to add a cut here as well. Bring up our knife tool with K, and right click allows you to finish one cut and go to another one without committing the tool. So once you hit enter, then it's finalized. So now we want to have our snapping turned on, and we're going to take our vertices here and just line them up so that we have straight lines. And at the bottom, we're going to have nothing to connect this to at the moment. So we can add another edge loop, bring that over here, and then just move it manually with snapping turned on. And once you have this space here that you want to fill in with a edge, select the two vertices and hit J for join. Put another cut right there. And I can hit J. F will not fill this correctly. It'll just put a edge on top of things that isn't connected to anything in between. J actually gave us a cut here, or joined our geometry here and here all the way across. So that is the preferable way to do it. So go ahead and do that on the top as well. Another function of the knife tool, once you hit K, hit A for constrain to angles, and you can change this by typing the angle you want. However, it already snaps to these 90-degree angles, so we're going to cut across like that, hit enter, and now we have a straight line. And we can select this vertex and hit J. We still need a little more geometry to work with, so let's join some of our vertices here. We're going to take these guys and snap them on the X. Now we have the geometry we need in order to create our handle. We may want one more edge just to have a little more control. Now that we have all of the geometry in place that we need, let's select these faces and these faces, Shift D, and separate. Select just this geometry and tab into edit mode. Select all of the edges around the outside. So what you can do is hit 2 for edge selection, select all, and then shift select these middle edges that we don't need at the moment, and this one as well, the edges facing the back of the door. You'll see why in just a moment. So now that we have these, Control E brings up your edge menu, hit L for bridge edges. Now we still have this gap in the back. And since we're dealing with separated objects, it's sometimes easier to see what we're doing if they are different colors. So let's go up here to the top, view menus, and change our color to random. That way everything has a different color. And these are actually kind of close colors. It's not really what I was going for, but it doesn't matter so much. Tab back into edit mode on the handle and have snapping turned on. And you're going to want to add an edge loop and move it on the Z to match here, and this one you want to match here. And the reason we're doing that is because we need to match up this geometry with this geometry so that we can kind of fill in that curve section. But first, let's do the same thing on the bottom. Now that we have that geometry in place, we can take these two very long edges, extrude them on the Y back here, and now we need to fill in this area. So what we can do is go into vertex selection mode, select both of these vertices and extrude on the Y. We're going to select these again. They're actually already selected. Fill them in. And now take this edge and extrude it down here. And extrude back here. And then you can take this, this, and this, hit fill. Do the same back there. So now we have this, and there's still some problematic geometry here, but we will deal with that in just a moment. We also need another edge loop in here. I did not do quite enough. And once again, we're going to have overlapping geometry, so go into vertex selection mode, select all, and merge by distance. You'll see down here it removed 4 vertices. Go ahead and do the same thing on the top, or to save time, we can cut right across the middle, hit enter or double click, whichever is easiest for you. Select all of the top vertices and delete them. Now we can select all of the remaining with A and Shift D, move it up on the Z, and we can scale it in a negative direction. So hit S, Z, -1. Now we have kind of the mirror shape of it, and move it up. With snapping on, move it back down. And once again, let's merge all of these vertices that are overlapping. That looks pretty good. Now that scaling in an opposite direction will cause us a problem with normals. If we select our overlays menu and turn on face orientation, you'll see half of it's facing in and half of it's facing out. In is red, out is blue. We want blue. So the way to solve that is to go into face selection mode and hit Shift N so that they all recalculate. It's recalculate normals is what that does. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on our freezer door. Hey, if you've made it this far in the video, you should be clicking those like and subscribe buttons, shouldn't you? There are also a few other ways to support the channel. For one, I'll be making this project file along with the finished high and low poly assets available in my store. There's a discount code for that at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around. Also, if you have any questions about what you're seeing in the tutorial, or if I have not explained something fully, feel free to drop your questions in the comments below. Now we have most of the shape of our refrigerator. We just need to add these seals behind the doors. But before we do that, we don't need our reference image anymore. So what we're going to do is hit M to move that to a new collection and call that ref or reference, something to that effect. Looks like my caps lock was on. and we can turn off that layer. We can also start naming all of our objects, so you can do that by clicking it and hitting F2, or by double clicking the name over in the outliner. Let's select both the upper door and the lower door and hit slash on the numpad to bring us into local view. And with both of them selected, hit tab and edit into edit mode, and now we can edit both at the same time. And I noticed we made a mistake, or I made a mistake. Maybe you caught it and didn't do the same thing, but right here we have some geometry that didn't get merged, and we still have our triangles and n-gons, so let's clean that up real quickly. Alright, with cleanup out of the way, we can move on to making the seals on the back of our doors. I've noticed this really doesn't have enough subdivision. I want to bring that over to match the one below it. With that a little bit more of subdivision in place, we can select all of the back faces of both doors. And we can initiate inset with the I key. So bring that in a little bit like that. This is going to be where our seal around the door is going to be. So let's separate those right now. Let's go into edit mode on both of those. And now we don't need all this extra geometry on these, so let's get rid of it. Control delete or Control X will dissolve without destroying your mesh. Select both faces and inset again. We're not going to need this center face on either of these, so delete faces, select all faces, and we want to have the body of the fridge showing in order to know how far we need to extrude these. So let's hit slash again, and with snapping turned on, extrude and make it flush with the rest of the fridge. We want to have some squishy ridges along this. I don't know if that's a good description or not, but we're going to go with that. Put some loop cuts around it. I think 3 will do what we need. Hit escape to finalize that without snapping over to the side, or just turn off snapping. And I'm going to turn off snapping now anyway. Let's select 2 rings on each of these. Use Alt-S to scale along normals. Scale these out. That's probably enough for the seal. Once we get some lighting and materials on there, it should work out pretty well. Let's turn on our mirror modifier just to check out what things are looking like. And that should give us an idea of our refrigerator at the moment. You'll notice that our seals do not have the mirror on. Well, that's just because we didn't turn it on. Now all of our objects are in place. You can take a look around, go into perspective mode. If anything looks off, or if you notice any bad geometry, fix that now. We're going to start adding our bevel and subdivision surface modifier. So first let's add a bevel modifier, and you'll see what it does. And the bevel parameters are set here. Let's set it to 2 and bring this down to 0.005, I think is what worked for me. We don't want it to be too sharp. And at this point we can actually right click and hit shade smooth and select all objects and do that. Now it won't look right at the moment, but as we start adding the bevel and our subdivision surface modifier, it will. Back on the primary piece that we were dealing with, hit Control 2, and that will add a subdivision with 2 subdivisions. Now that we have both of those modifiers on here that we want, we need to adjust them first because we're going to copy the same modifiers to everything else, and so we don't want to have to adjust the same modifiers the same way on every object over and over and over again. So first of all, we want our limit method to be weight. We are going to mark the edges that we want to bevel. So the way you would do that is, well, in this case we're just going to select all edges, and over here change the mean bevel weight to 1. And now anything with a mean bevel weight of 1 will have a 0.005 or 5 millimeter bevel. And we want those segments to be 2 and our subdivisions to be 2. One other thing is if we go into geometry, the miter outer, we don't want that to be sharp, we want that to be an arc. So right now, select everything with this still selected as the primary. Control L will bring up the link or transfer data menu and hit copy modifiers. Now they all have the same modifiers, and this does not have the mirror modifier. So before we do anything else, let's add the mirror modifier to our fridge door. And select these and the seal back here, and shift select the door, Control L, copy modifiers, and everything's copied over. Now you'll notice everything's really kind of like cartoony looking and blobby. That's because we have not yet marked the edges that we want to have beveled. So right now I'm just going to go through all of these objects and start marking all the beveled edges that I need. Once we have everything beveled that we want to have beveled by the modifier, we're going to need to make a few adjustments, such as these plastic inset pieces. They are too much of a bevel. Let's bring that down to 1 millimeter. And also, I think the corners of these doors need to have a little bit of rounding on them, or a rounded bevel. So let's go into edit mode on both of these and select just these front edges on the corners, and we're going to bevel those just a tad and give them 4 segments. Now we can comfortably cut these into quads. And I am using the join tool to do this. Now our model is looking pretty good. If we turn on a matte cap that is fairly shiny, we can see what the surface is looking like. So let's select this shiny red one, and you'll be able to see any obvious mistakes in your mesh where things are not smoothing correctly in this way. It looks like we have a little bit too much of a stretch here for the smoothing to happen with our subdivision surface modifier. So let's go back to our studio view and deal with some of the subdivision of our mesh. In front view, let's add one cut along the center, and we're going to bevel that up a little more. There we go. We want roughly squares as much as possible around the mesh. It helps the subdivision surface modifier to work a little better. Now that we have what looks like all of our objects in place, there's one piece missing, and that is the bottom hinge for the upper doors. Let's put our 3D cursor here by holding shift and right clicking. Let's go into front view and add a cube. We're going to scale that way down. And we'll move this guy here and move this out on the Y a little bit. Now is probably a good time to save if you haven't already. I'm going to go into local view on this, and we're going to add a few bevel edges. Now that that is marked, we can take the modifiers from another object that already has a mirror, such as these, which have a fairly sharp bevel on them. So copy modifiers. And the mirror occurs on the origin point of the object. Another way to do this is to select the object, go over to the mirror modifier in the stack, and change the mirror object to something else that is centered. So let's take the eyedropper and select the body. If you were following along with the dishwasher tutorial, which was published before this one, we created a bunch of materials that will work well on here as well. So we're going to append those from that project file. I'm going to put a link up here in the top right corner to that video. You can check the chapters to see exactly where the material creation portion is. But for right now, we're just going to append those materials. So we'll click on File, Append, and browse to our dishwasher project file. Once you've selected the project file of the dishwasher, find Materials, select all of it, and hit Append or Enter. Now we have all of the materials in this scene that we have in the dishwasher scene, but it may not be obvious as to where they are. So first let's hit Z and go to Material Preview. Now we can see the materials that are on our objects. There are still no materials. Select one of the objects, select the Materials tab, and this drop down will show you all of the materials that are in the scene. We want this to be stainless. So there is the stainless material that we created in the previous tutorial. We also want this, and this to have the same material. So we'll select them, select the first one that we did, and hit Control L and link materials. Now they all have the same material. Now let's select our plastic insets and select the gray plastic that we had created before. And the body of this is going to be that kind of bumpy painted black metal. And there's one material here that we do not need, which was one that I had baked to the dishwasher. That is not needed. So let me show you how to remove certain types of data from your Blender file. So up here in the outliner, select this drop down, select Blender file, and select meshes, or expand meshes rather. Here is the material that I don't need that I appended. So I'm going to right click and delete. Going back to View Layer, one thing that I have still not done that I noted before was to put the bevel modifier on these seal objects. Or rather, it has a bevel modifier, but we need to mark the bevel edges. So let's select one of these seals because what we're about to do does not work when editing two objects at a time. Go into Edit Mode, select all edges, and change them all to a bevel weight of 1. That is the function that will not work when editing two objects at once. So you'll just have to do one at a time. Not a big deal. The material for these seals can be similar to the plastic. It just needs to be a little bit rougher. So the easiest way to do that is to select our seals and select one of the plastic objects. Hit Control L for link materials and select one of them. And we're going to grab a corner of our editor, drag that right up here, select this drop down, and go to Shader Editor. And we can see the material right here. It's pretty simple. This number indicates how many objects are using this material. If we click it, it is now a copy of that material, and editing this will not edit our existing materials. The primary thing we want to change here is the roughness. These are supposed to be rubber, not hard, shiny looking plastic. So rather than mess with our color ramp, let's add a brightness node, bright and contrast, and change brightness in the white direction a little more. And actually 0.2 looks pretty good, I think. Let's select our other seal, shift select the first, and copy over our materials again. One thing that we have not imported a material for are these hinges. They are actually kind of a chrome look in all the pictures I've looked at. So let's create a new material. This will be very quick, very easy. This can be all white if you want it to be perfectly chrome. Turn metallic all the way up and turn the roughness all the way down. 0.1 is probably something a little more realistic. Of course, this is not the rendered view. This is not what it's going to look like in the end. How do we get that look? Well, first, we want to add a camera. So let's hit Shift S for our cursor menu, put it back to the world origin, look at it from the front view, and use Shift A to add a camera. Now, on this output tab that looks like a little printer, we can change the resolution. I'm going to make this square, so it's going to be 1080 both ways. So let's go into camera view and zoom that out a little bit. Home will zoom to the extent of your camera, and move that camera up on the Z axis a little bit, and get your refrigerator framed in there. And let's change the pivot point to 3D cursor. Rotate on the Z. That looks pretty good. And let's do one more append from our dishwasher scene. File, append, and go up a level. It's already in the file we had last time. And we want to import our world. In the shader editor, where you see object, select world. And in this dropdown, we now have two worlds in our scene. We want 001, which is the one we just imported. And that is using the same HDRI that we had set before. Now, if we go into render view, we can see the world around it. Control B will give you the ability to make a box selection around your camera and render only what's in it. Again, we can go to the render tab, go all the way down to film, find transparent, and we're not distracted by our background. I think that looks pretty good. We can rotate our lighting around a little bit from our HDRI to get just the look we want. But the point of this is not to get a cool render of a refrigerator, as super cool as that is, I guess. We're going to be using this in a later scene where we create a kitchen. As promised, here's the discount code for the finished assets and project file in my store. A link to that is in the description below. And as always, if you found this video helpful, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Carl with Blender Forge. Happy blending!